Good afternoon. My name is Nandi Wilson, and I am a member of the City Club Youth Council Forum. I am an 11th grader and a PSOP student, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's forum featuring the Honorable Teresa Fedor. Representative Fedor serves for now her third term in the Ohio House of Representatives, representing the 45th House District. She has spent 18 years in the classroom prior to her pursuing public service. She was elected to the Senate in 2002, and prior to that, the citizens of Toledo elected her to serve the 52nd District of the Ohio House of Representatives in 2000. In addition, she is a proud veteran. She served in the United States Air Force and Ohio Air National Guard before receiving her bachelor's in education from the University of Toledo. Since joining the General Assembly, Representative Fedor has worked to improve opportunities for all citizens, especially for our children. In 2009, the governor signed the human trafficking legislation into law, which created a penalty enhancement for human trafficking and created a task force to study the problem in Ohio. In 2010, the governor signed into law that legislation to make all human trafficking a standalone second-degree felony. In 2012, the governor signed into law Representative Fedor's most comprehensive human trafficking legislation to date. Representative Fedor currently serves on the State Government and Elections Committee, the Education Committee, and the Veteran Affairs Committee. She serves as the ranking member on the Agricultural and National Resources Committee. She is also the policy chair on the Ohio House Democratic Women's Census. In addition, she has been recognized for a multitude of awards, some including the NAACP Community Service Award, the Ohio Federation of Teachers Friend of Education Award, the Legislature of the Year's Human from Veterans of America Award, the Buckeye Chapter, the Second Harvest Food Banks, and the Environmental Council. The most recent, the Champion for Our Children Award from the National Exchange Club, just to name a few. She currently sits on the Trafficking in a Person to Study Commission as the chairperson of the Legislative and Legal Subcommittee. So without further ado, please welcome the Honorable Teresa Fedor.
Nice job. Thank you. Okay. Well, good afternoon. I can't hear you. Wonderful. It's such an honor to be here. You have no idea how long I've been waiting to talk to young people about human trafficking. It's been about 7 years. And my clarion call to everyone in Ohio, as I've talked to many, many groups, and I practically never say no to anybody who wants to know more about this topic, I ask them, where are your young people in the audience? Well, if you don't have young people, then you need to go back and find out how you can put a program together to help young people become educated and they become advocates to end human trafficking. So with that, I'm so honored and pleased to be here. I want to start out by saying human trafficking is modern slavery and the fastest growing crime, second to drug trafficking, $36 billion a year worldwide, and they don't pay any taxes. It's all cash. Because of the strong historical connotations of the word slavery, many people are unsure of what to think about modern slavery. What does modern slavery look like? To put it most simply, it's this. If a person cannot get away from a situation, they're not free to get away from a situation, they're enslaved. And that's a human rights violation. So that is as simple as it can get. But it is slavery, and it is happening today. Where can you find human trafficking today? Of course, on the streets, in restaurants, nail salons, sweatshops, strip clubs, social networking sites, fairs, 24-hour massage parlors, the pornography industry, the agricultural industry, meatpacking plants, landscape companies, truck stops, hotels, Super Bowls, sporting events, and operations that sell candy or magazines door to door. And I probably forgot a few. So that gives you the wide perspective of how vulnerable people can be and taken advantage of. Now, human trafficking has been found all across Ohio and has many venues. We've discovered it all across the board. We believe that we have more labor trafficking than we know, but since we're really focusing on the sex trafficking, commercial sex trafficking, that's most prominent in the United States. But I believe in Ohio, with the agricultural industry and other industries, I believe we're going to be able to discover more modern slavery. Now, we have about 27 million victims worldwide. 27 million victims. 80% are women and 50% are children. The majority of victims in the United States are, like I said, commercial sex victims. And each year there are approximately 200,000 victims. 100,000 of them are minors trafficked into the sex trade. And it is estimated that 200,000 children are at risk of trafficking. Bringing the issue home, it's estimated that over 1,000 youth born in Ohio have been sexually exploited over the course of a year, and we believe that's a very conservative number. And nearly 3,000 are at risk for commercial sexual exploitation. The average age of someone getting involved in sexual exploitation is 13 years old. How many here know a 13-year-old? Yes. And nearly 35,000 foreign-born Ohio citizens are at risk for trafficking in labor or sex trade. So as I've shared the fact that the average age is 13 years old, I want you to think about that as we, dive more into the statistics that I brought to you. As I've mentioned, 2,879 are the estimated youths born in Ohio who are at risk, and 1,078 we believed are sexually exploited over a course of a year, and 3,437 estimated number of foreign-born citizens who are at risk for trafficking in labor or sex trade, and sometimes it goes hand in hand. They can get into both. They're exploited both ways. 783 of whom are actually being trafficked at any one time. Now, why Ohio? That's been the question that I've been asked over and over and over. And as people look at the scope of the problem, they've addressed it. And we've discovered we're close proximity to the international airports, Canada, the East Coast, and military bases. More truck stops than any other state. Prevalence of agricultural farms, massage parlors, strip clubs where trafficking victims are often enslaved, large immigrant communities where it's easy to hide foreign-born trafficking victims, and get this, more colleges, universities than any other state. Many of you are going to be going into the colleges of Ohio, so you're going to be armed with information to advocate and to really look out for the cues when you go to college campuses. Now, what is human trafficking? Basically, the same as dating violence or domestic violence or any other abuse. It's about power and control. About power and control. And there are many aspects of how a trafficker will entice, force, coerce. They use intimidation, threats, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming. That's the big one. Because a lot of the victims are involved in crimes. Until this law was passed, they were the criminals. They weren't the victims. So that's the big issue. And there's a lot of shame involved. And when you're involved with that, it's really hard to come forward. And what we've discovered with a lot of our victims who become survivors, they didn't believe they were victims. They didn't believe they were a victim for a very long time. It took a lot to help them see that. And if you're 13 years old, you're still going through social emotional development. There's not a whole lot about the world you understand yet. So, these are very, very vulnerable individuals. Child sex trafficking victims. Any person under the age of 18 and involved in a commercial sex act where someone else is economically benefiting off the child. Many times these children perform the sex act 30 to 40 times a day. A day. Occurs when children are kidnapped, coerced, forced, manipulated, or this is the part that I heard from law enforcement. You know, there's a lot of changing of the culture with law enforcement, or appear to have entered the sex industry by choice. Ladies and gentlemen, no one chooses this by choice. I'm a former kindergarten teacher. There was a dress-up corner. I never saw a child try to dress up as a prostitute and say, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up. It's either, when you think about it, for men and women, and there are a lot of young boys involved in this. We're just discovering that in the research and the surveys that we're doing with victims. We're discovering as many boys as girls. It's either out of force that someone may be involved with this, or out of need. And that's the issue that I really focus on. You know, my background and passion is education. I left the classroom after 18 years to do something about education. Equality, education, equal opportunity, and really help people see what they can be. Whatever they want to be, they should be able to be in this country. But out of force or need. So there are different communities who accept this kind of behavior. Why is that? That's an indictment on our culture and our communities and our leaders. Just wanted to make a little side note there. And of course, we shared where you can find the sex trafficking victims, street-level prostitution, and all those listed motels, truck stops, tourist destinations. Sporting events. The Arnold Classic in Columbus. Every year we rescue victims from that. The Super Bowl, we rescued victims. And guess what? When they're rescued, they're on the missing children's list. There isn't a good connection between our missing children and the commercial sex trade. And we're just beginning to look for that, because a lot of times you're just going to say, oh, they're just runaways. That's an excuse to not look for them. And in my opinion, they are not throwaway children. Not one child in America is a throwaway child. And we should be looking for missing children. And that's where we're really trying to see where we can do a better job in public policy and support in really hearing those stories. And if they're being exploited, do you think they're going to come forward willingly when they're considered the criminal? They're going to be arrested and charged. No. So as I've looked at, how does this happen? How do so many young people become vulnerable? It's in every aspect, too. I mean, it's in every socioeconomic level, urban, suburban, rural. The internet sites can go across geographical lines. But I really feel that our young people are vulnerable because they're just sucked up into the market. And when you think about human trafficking, this is a market-based system. There's a demand. So there's a need. And so we're filling the demand. But our children, I think, are too innocently sucked up into the sexualization of our culture. There are even a line of clothing called pinfants. If you go online and you take a look at the infants, they even have stiletto heels for infants. That's how disgusting this is. So, I mean, what are we doing, and how are we objectifying, especially women, in our culture? And why do women think we have to play along with this? So I just want to, make that note for you. Be critical as you're growing older, as young adults, to really not get sucked up into the music and the movies and the, it's just everywhere. So you have to be smarter than that, because look where we are. Look where it's led us, to many of our children being so vulnerable and sucked up into it. It's so easy for them to get into this, and we'll talk about that. Now, this is alarming. The health problems. They suffer more hypertension, suffer more asthma, heart problems, cancer, HIV, which is huge. It can be spread, taken back to the home. 2.7 versus 0%. STIs or STDs, 37.2% versus 13.1%. The post-traumatic stress, 17.3% versus 8.7%. And a different perspective on that, I'm a veteran, so I've been thinking about the post-traumatic stress syndrome throughout this process. Because when you get a victim, you have to treat them as if they have post-traumatic stress syndrome. In our military, we have an all-volunteer military force. People volunteer. Some of them have to serve war, combat, and they come back with the post-traumatic stress syndrome. These victims didn't volunteer. There's no volunteer at all in this type of crime. So how much more do we have to pay attention to their recovery? How much more are they traumatically impacted in their lives, especially if they're starting out very, very young? So this is going to be a long-term process in trying to help our victims become survivors. What I would like to see is most of them become thrivers. And some of them that I've met along the way have gotten their college degree. Some have become a part of the solution for trafficking in Ohio and around the nation, and they've written books about their story and how easy it was to get caught up into this life, even if they had a very expensive zip code. You know, because we come up, as we grow up, we kind of have these ideals of what these victims may look like or where they come from. More depression, more bipolar disorder, 47% versus 17.4%, more schizophrenia, 16.3 versus 5.2. If you had to live that life under force, fraud, and coercion, 20, 30 men a night, every day of your life, that's pretty traumatic. The victimology, 83% have been threatened with a weapon, 82% have been physically assaulted, and when they go to the police look at them as the criminal. 68% have been raped, same issue. 59% have been raped 4 or more times. 49% reported that pornography has been made of them in prostitution. 75% have a drug abuse problem. 57% were sexually abused as children. We are 9th in the nation for child sex abuse in Ohio. Many of the traffickers are very smart in recognizing people who have low self-esteem, and a lot of times we find that our victims had child sex abuse. So as our public policies develop in children's services, we need to really do a good job of addressing the trauma treatment for anyone who's been sexually abused, because I don't believe we've done a good enough job for them. Let's see, 88% say they want to leave prostitution. Most of them want to leave. 77% of sexually exploited youth in Ohio will only go on to participate in adult street prostitution if they don't get intervention. Okay, take a look at this stark photograph. There are only 3 people up here. Okay, the first row, there are 8 photographs. The top photograph on your left is the first arrest of a underage victim. And that's after her 8th arrest or 7th arrest. That's what she looks like. These aren't all different pictures. The second row is the first woman, her first arrest. 7 arrests later, she's unrecognizable through the lifestyle. It is very, very, very rough. It's abusive. It is slavery. So the early booking photograph versus the booking photograph years later of prostitution. And what I see is happening, which is positive, many of the judges, law enforcement people are really starting to see this now, because we have a terminology of what it really is. People have never heard of human trafficking before, but you've heard of prostitution. So we've changed the culture of how we look at this. It is not a victimless crime. So, you know, you have the terminology, you're going to have the education, and you may have a life experience where you're going to be able to point to that and say, I think that's trafficking. And to me, that's the most important part of where we are today. We're still in the education and advocacy stage in Ohio, but for you, you need to be educated and armed with this type of information of what's going on in your culture, and it works very, it's very hidden, and it's hidden in plain sight. And once you get that information, it might be easier for you to identify, not only to protect yourself, but to protect your friends. And if you see someone involved, there's going to be help. They're not going to be arrested. They're going to get the help. And then we put all the law enforcement tools and justice tools in this law so that the real criminal goes to jail. The possible victim identifiers might be a hotel room, keys, and multiple cell phones, numerous school absences. There was a teacher who actually helped rescue an individual who people thought were just missing. And she asked the kids in her classroom, well, where's so-and-so? And they said, well, she's on Backpage. You know, Backpage is where they advertise. And that's where you're going to find a lot of your victims. So she was identified as a missing person, and they were able to rescue her. She was kidnapped. Fake IDs and lying about age, much older, abusive, and controlling boyfriends. You see that a lot. They become friends first, their boyfriend, especially if someone is having a hard time in life and low self-esteem. This person looks like a superstar. Looks like the best person that's ever been in their life. You know, they're their new boyfriend. They give them clothes, they give them money, they're taking good care of them. But guess what? 3 months later, they're being turned out to make money. So that happens a lot. Large amounts of cash, jewelry, new clothes, recurrent STD, and or other need for pregnancy tests, signs of physical assault including branding, tattooing, broken bones, black eyes. Now, a lot of our emergency room personnel are getting educated right now in the state of Ohio to look for this. Sexually explicit vocabulary and use of street terms like bottom, daddy, and out of pocket. And labor trafficking signs that someone is living where they are working, i.e. cots in the back of a nail salon. Oops. So this is an example of the branding that you may see on victims. Wayne's girl, Daddy's girl, JoJo, and James. And these all come from the FBI. Ohio has an FBI task force assigned to our state because there were so many victims as they were doing their FBI stings that they kept saying, why Toledo? Why Ohio? That they assigned an FBI human trafficking task force, anti-human trafficking task force. And so they've been developing a lot of cases and really help educate everyone in my community, and are part of the Human Trafficking Commission, helps us really focus on what we need to do to have the, the appropriate and adequate laws in place. Why do pimps recruit? Or who do they recruit? Everyone, black, white, Native American, Hispanic, child with low self-esteem. I keep saying that. And really 13-year-olds, they're kind of going through a phase, right? So almost everyone is vulnerable at that age. A child with no purpose, no direction, runaway, throwaway child, child with a void. The worst exploitation is often directed at American teenage girls who flee abusive homes, end up at the bus station, and the only person there to help is a pimp. By Nicholas Kristof, a journalist and author of Half the Sky. It's a very good book, by the way. And who helps to recruit victims? Well, the recruiters, they're other trafficked girls, minors. They'll become friends of girls, and then they'll get them involved. teenage boys, and adult women. The bottom, or the forcer, is the one who sets everything up, so make sure all the girls or the victims behave right, help them through this process. The trafficker really doesn't get his hands or her hands dirty. Although there was a case in Toledo where two sisters were trafficking their children in a migrant camp. And the 13-year-old girl who was trafficked by her mother for years found out that her 9-year-old sister was getting ready to be turned out, and she actually called and got help. Not for herself, but for her sister. And it was a big bust out in Fulton County. Every trafficking case is so different and unique. You can't find one that's just like the other. And it's operating before us. So we need to really understand and become a community to help everyone in our community do a good job of growing up, having a good life, getting support through education and in the community. And I think that's how we become a stronger unit to help some people who have just been through awful situations as young people. And where do pimps recruit? We've gone over this, but this was a note found by the FBI. This was in a restroom, advertising. You can tell by the handwriting that it was probably someone late junior high school. Must be 18 and up. You're invited. Candy's money. And they give the phone number, bachelor parties, escorting, private and safe. Guaranteed large amount of money in New York City, up to $1,000 a week, and go home to chill with money. Call for more information. Those are the kinds of things that they've found. The use of social networking sites. Pimps use social networking sites such as MySpace, Facebook, Backpage to communicate with other pimps and recruit new victims. Pimps publicize criminal activity, photos of money, jewelry, automobiles. They post provocative images of victims, child and adult-like trophies. Place online ads for adult services on pages like Craigslist or Backpage. Will often use code words like fresh or new in town to indicate a minor. Pimp control and traffickers. Pimps are masters of the art of seduction. They are able to identify the vulnerabilities of a specific child and exploit them. Like, I often think about the comment Dr. Celia Williamson made about how we're trying to address this. She says we're circling our wagons and using pop guns. And these guys have nuclear power. I mean, that's how far off we are about how this is operating and what's going on. Well, once seduced, pimps use torture tactics to control their victims. Think about it. Walk in those shoes, especially if you're a male. Coaches need to talk to the boys in the locker room. That's my next passion, is to get this thing straightened out about objectifying women and thinking it's funny. Because you would not be one that would want to walk in these shoes. Such tactics consistently lead to complete obedience and a breakdown of personal agency and autonomy, and very easily done. Pimps use the increased glamorization of pimp hoe culture, as well as cultural acceptance of demand for child victims. There's a demand, huge, huge demand, to help maintain control of the child. I get reports from college campuses, and I've been involved with a lot of the sororities and fraternities, but some are still having CEO hoe parties, just like a couple months ago. That has to stop. It really does. And there's no sense to it. And why don't victims seek help? They're in captivity, they're in confinement, and they're in isolation. And there are a lot of people around them to make sure they behave right, or they will receive the threats and beatings. And a lot of them are drugged just to be contained and controlled. So they are involved in being so hooked on heroin or cocaine or any other drug that they will do this for this individual to get that drug. Use of violence and threat of violence to family members and loved ones. We hear that a lot. A lot of the victims hear that their younger sister is going to be kidnapped and involved, or their family pet, or they've got pictures of this individual and they're going to show their family and expose them and humiliate them. Fear, shame, self-blame, and hopelessness. A lot of hopelessness. It's pretty traumatic for them, and our society doesn't tolerate this kind of behavior very well. They usually blame the woman, the victim. There's a dependency, again, the drug issue. Fear of arrest and incarceration. That was the biggest fear. Many of the victims have to do things like rob banks for the trafficker. They are doing the crime for the trafficker to get the money. And of course, they're living in a atmosphere of fear and threats and abuse that they don't feel that they have any way out. So that's where we come up with House Bill 262. It's a victim-centered approach, and 50 states and around the world, we come up with 3 aspects of a victim-centered legislative adequate approach. And my first area that I look at is prevention, and that's why I'm here. I'm here to help prevent this from happening to another generation, and for you to become abolitionists, that you should be, to stop this, because you're already too old. You're on the demand end of things. The average age of the man is 22 years old. The number 1 user is a middle-aged white man. And the international sex tourism, United States middle-aged white man. So because there's a demand, we have to stop and nip this evil thing in our culture right out of the ground. Get the root of the roots so it can't grow. The next is, so I said prevention, protection. So protection. We want to have a victim-centered approach where the victim is not incarcerated. They are not to blame. They are a victim. And then the next piece is the prosecution. And when you think about prosecution, we need assistance from the victim to prosecute. And that's where it's the toughest for law enforcement. Many of the victims have ended up killing themselves as they're part of the process of being rescued because they're so damaged and they can't get out of the drug and alcohol abuse. Psychologically, it's really rough for them. So it's a really delicate balance of treatment and long term. But many of them have been courageous with a lot of help and support to put traffickers in jail for a very, very long time. So what we've done is to protect anyone under 18. They're held, the court to hold a delinquent child complaint in abeyance, which is just holding it to the side, pending the child's completion of diversion actions if the child is charged with prostitution-related conduct or is a victim of trafficking in persons. What we've done is we made it so that anyone under 18, you don't have to be under pimp control to get the help. Anyone under 18 in the state of Ohio is going to get help, because I don't believe that a child can say they're going to be a prostitute. Allows a person convicted of committing a prostitution-related offense to apply for expungement of the record if the person was a trafficking victim at the time of the offense. That means a lot of our adult victims who were victimized when they were teenagers, they have criminal records. They're going to be able to now, for the first time, get their records expunged, cleaned off, and get a job and get their life back together, and they're going to start getting services. That's a big issue for your community to clean up, for the adult victims. Not only stop it from going on, but helping those people come forward and get the help that they deserve. Permits victims of trafficking to receive awards from the Victim of Crime Fund. Many of our victims, when they're rescued, there's no place to put them because there's no money that we have in our government to get them the housing they need and the services. and I'll finish this one up. Increases penalties for trafficking in persons and procuring in certain circumstances. We made it from a second-degree felony for standalone trafficking crime to a first degree, and all of the offenses that were misdemeanors have now become felonies, whether it's on the demand side, the customer, or the trafficker. And that way we've raised the risk in the state of Ohio for anyone to operate in this criminal enterprise.
Good afternoon. My name is Celeste Kamasa, and I am a member of the City Club Youth Forum Council and a junior at Cleveland Early College at John Hay High School. Today, at this City Club of Cleveland Youth Forum, we are listening to the Honorable Teresa Fedor. We will return to our speaker in just a few moments, but we encourage you to formulate questions for our speaker now while we break for a few announcements. We welcome you to this City Club Youth Forum, part of the traditional City Club, which began in 1912. It is the oldest continuous running free speech forum in the country. Today's City Club Youth Forum is made possible through generous grants from the Eva L. and Joseph M. Bruni Foundation, the True Mart Fund, and the Thomas H. White Foundation. We would like to thank our founders for their generous support. The City Club Youth Forum series is planned by a council of students from several area high schools. I would like to thank the members of the council whose names are in the program. Also, please note that there are surveys and pencils on your tables. Please begin filling these out, and we will collect them when you leave. Now, we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional questions and answers. To ask a question, and it must be a question, please raise your hand. As a courtesy, please stand, state your name and school, and hold your applause until the end of our program. Our microphone holders are Manny LeBron and Destiny Ware. First question, please.
Well, I would like to finish up my PowerPoint, okay? There's more to this bill. Hold on. While you're coming up with your questions. We prohibit a person from importuning or soliciting another to engage in sexual conduct when the other person is a minor under 16, and that will be a felony. The importuner must know the minor's age, and the minor must be a trafficking victim. When the bill moved out of the House, that was not there. Anyone under 18 was going to get help. But now we've changed it in the Senate, and so that's my next bill to correct. Requires those convicted of promoting prostitution or human trafficking to register as a sex offender. Increases penalty for obstruction of justice. Allows trafficking victims to sue their traffickers. That's a really big issue. Huge issue. They have a civil remedy. And I think that encourages people to come out. And that will allow us to identify the traffickers in your neighborhood or in our community and in our state. Allows personal effects of pimps to be seized at arrest and provides that asset seized from the pimps to be earmarked for victim services. In other words, they wear a lot of gold and jewelry so that if they go to jail, it gets put into a safe place. When they get out, they can use that gold for bail and for lawyers for their court. What we're saying is you're not going to get that gold back. We're taking it and we're going to put it into a victims fund. Requires creation of an awareness poster. It can be downloaded on the government website. You can get a hold of my office to get that. They're still being developed. But I want them everywhere, like in restaurants, near college campuses. We put them in the state safety patrol. State Highway Patrol puts them along the turnpike, the exits, the rest stops, and there have been victims rescued as a result. So we've been getting graded in Ohio, and the last grade we got from Shared Hope International, we increased from a D to a C. And as an educator in my background, that's not good enough. But if you look at the statistics in the grading, the most, I think, important part of getting started is the criminal justice tools for investigation and prosecution. We got 15 out of 15. So law enforcement's getting their training, judges are getting their training, prosecutors. They've got the tools to use. Now the community can put the glasses on and start rescuing. how does your state rank on human trafficking? For the Polaris Project, we were one of the 10 worst, or part of the Dirty Dozen, 4 years ago. And just this last year, we're now most improved, one of 4 states most improved for human trafficking and putting the pieces in place to combat it. Now, in the next General Assembly, I'm going to do some things extending the statute of limitations for trafficking cases, both criminally and civilly, terminating parental rights in cases of human trafficking, because we're finding out that this is intergenerational, that parents are trafficking their children. Removing from the importuning law regarding 16 and 17 years old the requirement that an importuner or demand the customer is only guilty if a victim is also a victim of human trafficking. The requirement that an importuner is only guilty if he knew the age of his victim. So the other policy directives we're really working on are the training programs, continued work with the Trafficking in Person Study Commission, which I created as the first pillar in place for the state of Ohio to study the scope of the problem and put the recommendations. We have roadmaps and reports from this commission on the Ohio Attorney General's website, which you can download. And they also have like many information on what human trafficking is, what it looks like, and what you can do. And then what you can do, I put, I think, on your tables, action steps and coalitions that you can get involved with that have developed in the last 7 years to help us really understand what you can do to join the movement against human trafficking in your area. With that, and then also if you suspect anyone is involved in trafficking, you can call the 888-737-37888 number. It is a Polaris project in Washington, D.C. that will take the phone call, and a lot of people have been rescued through that means, and then a lot of victims have made the phone call to get rescued. They call law enforcement, they come and get them, and they're, okay. And then there's more resources on traffickingresourcescenter.org. So it's been a pleasure to be here, really my honor to speak to all the wonderful leaders and the power that you have in this room for the potential to change the world is really here. I'm just doing the best that I can to put these things in place for you, then to be the leaders of the future so that your children are not in that vulnerability at-risk group because you've cleaned it up and we're no longer operating this criminal enterprise in Ohio or the United States. So thank you. Do we have any questions? Mm-hmm.
My name is Destiny Ware. I attend Cleveland School of Science and Medicine at John Hay campus. What encouraged you to want to develop a career involving this topic?
Well, like I said, the FBI did a big sting in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and they discovered many victims. There were 177 victims of sex trafficking, and 45 of them were children. One as young as 10 years old. And that was happening in my district. I was a senator at the time, and I considered those my babies. I take it personally. And our community immediately got together a coalition to fight this and find out why Toledo. Discovered through an FBI report, reading about 2 o'clock in the morning when I can't sleep about this problem, that the FBI did an Oklahoma sting and think because of that gap of traffickers, the Toledo pimps decided to take advantage of that. And it's not that you see it in the streets of Toledo. They were transported all over the United States. And so I got involved with wanting to make the laws to strengthen this, and I found out that there were no laws in our Ohio Revised Code against slavery.
My name is Naira. I'm from John Adams High School, and at John Adams High School, I'm a part of the leadership team, and we're a part of the QRT, and we help with the 4th District Police Department. And what we do as the QRT, we're the quick response team, and so we help with missing people. We go out and help look for missing people. I wanted to know, why is it so hard to put out a missing persons report when that should be a first priority is if a child is missing? Why is it so hard to help gather people up to go look for this missing child?
Well, I don't think we have a process in place to really look at it seriously and quickly. And we're discovering that we need to look on Backpage, Facebook, and other places for these victims. A lot of groups and organizations, and you'll see a lot of them in your pamphlet that I have been doing that. And they've been able to find those missing children and help them get help. So I think it's just part of understanding that that's probably an avenue that they're involved in very easily. They're saying within 48 hours of a runaway, they're approached by a trafficker. So now that we know this and we're getting this information from victims, we have to have an appropriate response, you know, to really go looking for the missing children.
Hi, I'm Sarah Abdelli, and I'm from Gilmore Academy, and I was just wondering what charges are brought against these victims of this human trafficking and why they're treated as criminals.
Well, they were charged, and they'd be under juvenile. It could be various crimes. It could be truancy, could be runaway, could be a number of charges. Some of them get involved with robbing banks. You know, they're involved with drugs, trafficking drugs. So it's a way that the criminal network uses victims to do a lot of other things, and they get caught. And the victims think that they're criminals, and if they're told, they're going to get even in more trouble, and a lot of the traffickers will bail them out. And usually if they bail them out, they've got to work that money off that they were bailed out with as soon as they get them back. So, you know, we have to support the victims to come forward and let the victims know in Ohio, you don't have to be hopeless. There's help. Come forward. We're going to understand. We're not going to judge. We're going to fight the stigma with all of this and not laugh about it because it's the issue that we're talking about. And the more we not laugh about it, the more we understand, and the more you become part of the solution.
Hi, my name is Nandi Wilson, and as far as youth is concerned, how do you think we should go about, you know, if we do come across a friend or we do come across victims or a family of victims for that matter, how should we interact or, you know, encourage them to get help? Like, how you suggest we go about that?
Well, I think education is part of it, help them see that they're a victim, but the 888-373-888 number is a good place to start, even for yourself. If you suspect something, they can help you think about it. You can give that individual that number, get a hold of maybe community leaders that you trust. You know, a lot of teachers are getting training in this area because they see it firsthand. A lot of the healthcare individuals, law enforcement. There are coalitions in Cleveland and organizations that you could call and ask. So there's a lot of help to get started.
My name is Natasha Medorsky. I'm from Cleveland Heights High School. I have sort of a related question. You mentioned Nicholas Kristof's book, Half the Sky. I read it recently, and he was focused mostly on India and Nepal, trafficking there, and one of the most difficult issues he talked about was that once they worked so hard to rescue these victims, a lot of victims ended up going back to the brothels and the places that they'd been enslaved because of drug addictions, or they just weren't able to deal with a world that they completely didn't understand. So I'm wondering, to what degree have you seen that kind of problem here, and how do you combat it?
The reason we put a diversion program in our juvenile court system is because they will be assigned a guardian ad litem. And that guardian ad litem is in charge of children's services and any victim services that the guardian ad litem sees they need. And they're the ones who say to children's services, no, you have to continue servicing them because they're not quite where they need to be. So you've got that individual helping them, represent them in a lot of different issues to get the help that's there for them. But in states like Illinois, they don't arrest, they don't have any diversion program. They're finding that the victims go in one door because they're set free, and they go out the other door and get right back into it. So because they're so young and they're still juveniles, they need a lot of help and support. So we're building it every day. The governor put a task force together, an interagency task force, and all of his departments combed through their policies. They studied trafficking and they studied the recommendations that we put together in 2010 and made adjustments. We're going after grants to help with this. But there are only 10 beds in Ohio, and there are only about 150 in the nation. When we find victims, there's no place to put them. They can't really go into a regular foster care because the foster care parents need to understand trafficking. They need to know how to help them. And it's a very difficult, traumatic situation. So Children's Services will be in our training foster care parents to take the victims and help them get through their post-traumatic stress syndrome, the trauma treatment that needs to be there. It's very delicate and long-term. Some of them don't make it. And it is difficult. And every single victim has a different story. There's a different story about every single victim and what happened to them. And every individual, just like you, has something inside them that is the fight or flight, you know. In me, I got fight. I fight to the bitter end. I fought until we got laws to protect kids from this. It took me 7 years. But sometimes people are so torn down and have had such a traumatic experience in life altogether, it's just tragic. And so I'm asking you, what are you going to do about it? You know, what can you do about it? What can you do to stop this? You know, we've got the things in place and we're moving in that area, but if there's a demand, we're going to have it. So we are really focusing in Ohio on the demand. There are lots of reverse stings going on. We're going to make it a very high risk to operate in Ohio with this type of crime.
Hi. Over here.
Oh, hello.
My name is Joyce Hood, and I work with a program called Survivors Victims of Tragedy. And what we found out was a lot of people were, just as you stated, were found and then with no place to go. Then how do we get you guys to put together a piece so we can get that money to have them someplace to be housed and to better identify, because we find out that a lot of people are working in hotels, restaurants, everything like that, but to try to bring home money, and they think they're hurting them real bad, but they're enslaved. It does not have to be just sexually, but it can be just working them incorrect. So how do we better identify them as young people, and then to go ahead and tell them this person needs some help, and then how can we as people in the community do a follow-up?
Well, I believe there's a Cleveland Coalition. Are you part of the Cleveland Coalition?
Yes, I am.
Okay. The Governor's Task Force for Interagency, that's a good guide to go to figure out what we're going to. The resources, the Attorney General just got $700,000 for coalitions to help build that. But again, we have to build better drug and alcohol treatment programs. We already have that problem anyway, but why not build it better? Because these victims need that. It's long-term, and actually, I'm testifying tomorrow on a resolution for our federal government to reauthorize the TVPA, which allows us to get more money in the state of Ohio for victim services. And of course, we're not sure what's going to happen at the federal government level, but I'm fighting to get those services and the monies back here in Ohio because we are looking now. We don't have our heads in the sand. And we are protecting every single person in the state of Ohio. We want to rescue, just like we did with the Underground Railroad. We want to rescue. And that's our #1 mission, is to rescue. Oh.
Hi, I'm Nicole Brzezowski. I'm from Gilmore Academy. My question is, why have law enforcement been so unaware of how to deal with victims of human trafficking and of human trafficking in communities, if it's become the second highest growing crime?
It's a great question. When I first started out learning about this and talking to community members across the state, a lot of law enforcement said, we don't have human trafficking. They're very defensive. We don't have human trafficking in our suburban or rural or urban area. And I would ask this question, do you have child prostitution? They'd say yes. I said, well, then you have trafficking. That's slavery. And they're minors. And someone's making money off of them, and they're not getting any of the money. And their lives are ruined. That's trafficking. We have redefined what this is. And we're not blaming the girl. We're looking at this as a criminal enterprise. So that's a great question, because now law enforcement have different glasses on. They're looking at it differently. And a lot of the adult prostitutes are victims. So we've got that whole arena yet, you know, because they were victims under 18 and they couldn't get out, or they dropped out of school, or they're involved with drugs, or they've got a criminal record, they can't get a job. They're stuck and they're hopeless, and that's not fair. If we didn't get our act together until now, is it their fault? I'm not going to forget them. So that's a great question, and law enforcement has a long way to go. If you know someone in law enforcement, ask them the question. But what's very exciting to me, I've been talking to judges. They're very interested in knowing what to do and be a part of the solution. So that to me is good. That's a good anchor for the appropriate sentencing. And we have mandatory sentencing. 10 to 15 years mandatory. We match the federal government sentencing so that if someone's caught in Ohio, they're not going to get a break because we have prosecuted a case in Ohio. They're going to have the same penalties as the federal government. So we thought that was very important to send the message. And we have found traffickers coming in from New York on their way to Detroit, stop in Toledo. They got caught in a reverse sting. But they were getting ready to set up a little network in Toledo. And I'm very happy we caught them. You know, but it was an online situation, and we caught customers too, who are very prominent citizens in my community. So the message is, clean up your act, because we're on you. You know, we got your number.
Good afternoon. My name is Monica Nemeth, and I'm a member of the City Club Youth Forum Council. I'm a junior at Shaker Heights High School. Today at this City Club of Cleveland Youth Forum, we've been listening to the Honorable Teresa Fedor. Before you go, we would like to ask you to fill out the surveys on your tables and return them at the door. Thank you to our speaker, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen.